Hi Reddit, I'm Hannah, 26 years old, and this entire situation still leaves me wondering how people can twist logic until it screams. My dad, Mark, is 54, and ever since I can remember, he's been a dreamer in the most inconvenient sense of the word. He's the kind of man who can make grand plans in his head but never quite follow them through. Growing up, I loved that about him. His imagination, his optimism, but as I got older, I realized those qualities often came with a heavy dose of irresponsibility. When my mom passed away when I was 13, it was just the two of us. I had to grow up fast. I learned to balance the checkbook, remind him to pay bills, and even negotiate with utility companies when he forgot to send payments. My dad would tell people, "Hannah's my little rock," as if that was a compliment, when in reality it meant I was more of a co-parent than a child. Still, I never resented him for it. He was grieving, I was grieving, and somehow we managed to build a life that worked, barely, but it worked. When I was in college, he started dating again. I encouraged it. I wanted him to have companionship, laughter, someone to share his days with. Then, 4 years ago, he met Linda. She's 47 now, and when they first started dating, I truly thought she was a good match for him. She was lively, charming, and seemed to bring structure to his otherwise messy world. But it didn't take long before I realized that structure came at a cost. Mostly to me. Linda always had this way of making everything about herself. She would compliment me in a tone that somehow managed to sound like an insult. She once said, "It's so admirable that you're okay with simple clothes. I'd die without regular salon visits." Another time, when I told her I was saving to start a small coffee and bookshop, she smiled sweetly and said, "That's adorable. A hobby business, like one of those cozy movie places." My dad laughed along like it was just playful teasing, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't think I'd ever actually pull it off. Still, I stayed polite. My dream plan, as I called it, was everything to me. I've worked 2 jobs since college, mornings at a local bakery and afternoons at a small independent bookstore. Every tip, every bonus, every birthday gift went into that savings account. By last spring, I had saved $42,000. It wasn't enough to launch fully, but it was enough to lease a small storefront and start building something real. My dad knew about it and always bragged to his friends. "My girl's gonna be a business owner before 30. He'd say proudly, and I believed he meant it. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. Dad and Linda invited me over for what they called a family announcement. They made it sound like good news, so I brought a bottle of wine and baked cookies, thinking it might be an engagement or something lighthearted. When I walked into their house, Linda was practically glowing, bouncing on her heels like she couldn't wait to spill the news. She said, "We've decided to have a free wedding. Isn't that genius?" At first I laughed because I thought she meant something small and heartfelt, like a backyard ceremony with a few close friends. But then she launched into details that made my stomach turn. Her free wedding wasn't free at all. She wanted to rent a local vineyard as the venue, which required a $10,000 deposit. Her plan, to use my savings for that deposit, plus decorations and dress alterations. Then she said, "We'll have everyone bring food from home, potluck style. That way we don't have to pay a caterer. It's free because everyone contributes." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. My dad was nodding along like a proud co-conspirator, saying things like, "It's a family effort. Everyone's invested in our happiness." Linda clasped her hands dramatically and added, "It'll be symbolic. Everyone bringing a dish means everyone's blessing our union." I finally asked, "So, free means free for you two?" Linda blinked innocently and said, "Well, families help each other. You'll get your money back eventually after the honeymoon." My dad nodded like this was a reasonable promise. That's when something inside me snapped, not anger at first, but disbelief so strong it turned into laughter. I said, "Your free wedding isn't free. It's a debt disguised as a party." The air in the room froze. My dad's smile disappeared, replaced by the expression of a man realizing his adult daughter wasn't going to play along. Linda's face went cold like someone had flipped a switch. She said in that low, passive-aggressive tone of hers, "So you're refusing to support your father's happiness?" I looked right at her and said, "I've been supporting his happiness since I was 13. My dad winced. Linda's jaw tightened. There was a moment of silence so thick it felt like a wall between us. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and said I needed to leave. As I headed for the door, Linda muttered something about ungrateful children and selfish energy. My dad didn't say a word. I walked out, got in my car, and just sat there for a while trying to process the absurdity of what had happened. A few days passed without a word from either of them. Then, on the 7th day, my phone buzzed with a long text from Dad. Wait, it said, "I just don't understand why you're being so cold about this. Families should share resources. You can't take money with you when you die. Linda and I just wanted a special day, and it's not like we wouldn't pay you back. Money is temporary, but love and family are forever." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling this mix of sadness and exhaustion. My dad, the man who used to brag about my ambition, was now guilt-tripping me into funding a wedding for a woman who never saw me as anything more than a financial convenience. I scrolled back to the top of his text, read it one more time, and felt something inside me harden. I didn't respond. Apparently, Linda didn't take the rejection well. It started trickling back to me in the most ridiculous way possible, through Facebook. My cousin Emma, who's 29 and has always had a sharp eye for family drama, sent me a string of screenshots one evening. She began the message with, "You're going to want to sit down for this." Attached were images from a brand new Facebook group called Mark and Linda's DIY Dream Wedding. The cover photo was a blurry picture of my dad and Linda holding plastic champagne glasses in their backyard, surrounded by fairy lights that looked like they'd been stolen from a dollar store. But it wasn't the photo that made my stomach twist. It was Linda's post pinned right at the top. She had written a long, performative message about community, family support, and love triumphing over selfishness. Her exact words, which I now know by heart because I reread them 3 times in disbelief, were, "Some people in the family refuse to help us, but true love finds a way. We're creating a free wedding through kindness and shared blessings." The post was decorated with heart emojis and glitter gifts, and the comment section was a mix of confused relatives and her equally delusional friends congratulating her on her creative idea. At first I thought that was the end of it, just Linda being dramatic online, but then Emma sent another screenshot that made my jaw drop. Linda had launched a GoFundMe campaign. The title was, "Help Mark and Linda celebrate their dream wedding," and the description was worse than anything I could have imagined. It literally said, "Our daughter Hannah is saving for her business, but we're hoping she'll still pitch in for her father's big day. Every dollar helps love bloom." She used my name, in a public fundraiser without my consent, essentially suggesting I was involved or supportive. The campaign had already been shared by several extended relatives who clearly hadn't heard my side of things. The comments were full of pitying messages like, "So sweet of Hannah to help." What a good daughter, and family coming together for love. I felt sick. It was manipulative, humiliating, and outright dishonest. I immediately reported the GoFundMe page for misuse of my personal information and misrepresentation. Then, against my better judgment, I messaged Linda directly. I told her to remove my name and any mention of me immediately, or I would consider legal action for defamation and false representation. Her response came back within minutes. She wrote, "You're overreacting, sweetheart. Nobody's suing family. It's just a way to get everyone excited about the wedding. Relax." Relax. That word made my blood boil. This woman had publicly dragged my name into her mess, twisted the story to make herself look like a martyr, and expected me to smile politely while she did it. The next day, my dad called. I could tell from the shaky tone in his voice that Linda had gotten to him first. He started crying almost immediately, saying that I had embarrassed them by threatening legal action and that Linda just wanted to include me in their celebration. I told him, as calmly as I could, that including me didn't mean using me, that it wasn't love to manipulate family for money, especially not through lies. There was a long silence before he said, "I can't talk to you when you're like this," and hung up. After that call, I didn't reach out again. I thought it was over. I thought they'd realize their so-called free wedding wasn't as genius as they believed. But over the next few weeks, I heard through the family grapevine that their plans were unraveling fast. Apparently, the DIY Dream Wedding group had started as a source of enthusiasm and moral support, but quickly descended into chaos. People were backing out left and right once they realized what DIY actually meant. Linda had been assigning dishes and decorations to relatives like it was a mandatory group project. Cousin Sarah was told to bake enough cupcakes for 80 guests. My Aunt Karen was invited to handle all the floral arrangements. Even my 70-year-old grandmother was told to help with table linens because Linda didn't want to rent them. The kicker? Linda and my dad still wanted the venue to look like a fairy tale. They had reserved the local vineyard but hadn't paid the deposit yet because, of course, they were still hoping someone, read me or the internet, would cover it. The vineyard eventually canceled their reservation after weeks of unpaid invoices. When that happened, Linda posted another Facebook update saying, "The universe is testing our love, but we won't give up," complete with a crying emoji and a heart. It became a spectacle. Friends of friends started sharing her posts ironically, commenting things like, "Manifest that money, queen," and DIY stands for "Don't Involve Yourself," apparently. The fundraiser didn't raise more than $80 before GoFundMe took it down after my report. Linda, of course, blamed me for that too. I heard from Emma that Linda went on a rant during a family brunch about how ungrateful children ruin good things. My dad apparently sat there quietly while she vented, staring into his coffee like he wanted to disappear. It was hard to picture the man who used to call me his little rock, reduced to this version of himself, fragile, guilt-ridden, and blind to manipulation. The wedding date kept getting pushed back because nothing was coming together. The potluck plan was a disaster before it even started. People refused to commit to cooking massive portions for an event that frankly sounded like a logistical nightmare. Linda tried guilt-tripping everyone by saying things like, "This isn't about food, it's about love." But that didn't convince anyone to roast a ham for 80 people. By the time summer rolled around, the Facebook group had gone quiet except for a few pity likes on Linda's inspirational quotes about resilience and choosing joy despite betrayal. My dad stopped posting altogether. My relatives began referring to the whole ordeal as the free wedding fiasco. It became a family punchline. The last update I got came from my Aunt Karen, who called me one evening, laughing so hard she could barely speak. She said that Linda had tried to host a planning meeting and only 4 people showed up. 2 left early, 1 refused to bring food, and the 4th said they'd only attend the ceremony if there was an open bar, which of course there wouldn't be. My aunt ended the call still giggling, saying, "At this rate, it'll just be the 2 of them and a store-bought cake." Then she paused and added with perfect comedic timing, "I'm not roasting a turkey for your midlife crisis." Things escalated in a way I didn't think they could. I had already distanced myself from my dad and Linda after the GoFundMe fiasco, and I thought that was the worst of it. I told myself that if I ignored their circus long enough, they'd eventually stop trying to drag me into it. But a few weeks later, reality reminded me that with those two, the chaos never ends, it just changes shape. It started with an email from my bank. The subject line read, "Unusual activity detected on your account," and for a moment, my stomach dropped. I opened it and saw that there had been an attempted withdrawal from my savings account, specifically the account I'd been using for my coffee and bookshop fund. The amount wasn't small either. They had tried to take out $5,000 in one transfer. Thankfully, the transaction was flagged because it didn't match my normal activity, and the bank automatically froze the account. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of scam. But when I looked closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The attempted withdrawal had been made through online access connected to a very old joint account, one that I had opened with my dad when I was 17 so I could deposit my part-time paychecks while I was still a minor. I had thought I closed it when I started college and opened my own independent account, but apparently the joint link had stayed active. My dad, knowingly or not, still had access. I sat there for a long moment, just staring at the screen, trying to process the fact that my own father had tried to take money from me. Not ask, not discuss, but take. The same man who used to tell everyone how proud he was of my saving habits had now decided my discipline was his opportunity. When I called him to confront him, he sounded casual at first, like he didn't understand why I was upset. He said it was a misunderstanding, that Linda thought it was fine because it's all family money anyway. I could hear her in the background feeding him lines, whispering things like, "Tell her it was just temporary." That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't some innocent accident. They actually thought they could dip into my savings and pay it back later, like I was a personal line of credit. When he said they were just going to put it back after the wedding gifts came in, I felt something inside me go quiet. It wasn't anger at that point. It was something heavier: disappointment, disillusionment, the realization that my dad was no longer the person who used to protect me. I told him that if he ever touched that account again, or if I saw one more suspicious attempt, I would file a report. His silence on the other end said everything. I knew he understood that I meant it. After that call, I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just got practical. I went to the bank the next morning, withdrew everything from the compromised account, and closed it permanently. Then I moved my savings into a brand new business account under my company's name, something that required identity verification and separate legal documentation. The bank representative looked at me with sympathy when I explained what had happened, but I brushed it off. I was done being embarrassed for other people's actions. I also filed a quiet fraud alert on my financial records, just in case they tried anything else. It felt surreal, like I was taking precautions against strangers instead of my own family. But at that point, the illusion of family trust was gone. I wasn't protecting myself from outsiders anymore. I was protecting myself from people who shared my last name. I didn't tell anyone right away, not even my cousin Emma. I didn't want this to become another round of family gossip or Facebook drama. I just needed distance. But the universe, in its twisted sense of humor, decided to serve karma in a way that even I couldn't have scripted better. Apparently, after the GoFundMe disaster, Linda had gotten desperate to make the wedding look legitimate again. She had been bragging about hiring a professional planner to help them organize a new version of the event, someone her friend's cousin recommended, who supposedly had experience with rustic weddings. The planner's name was something generic, like Melissa or Marissa, and she had pitched them an amazing deal: full coordination, decorations, and logistics, help for only $2,000. That was, of course, music to Linda's ears. She and my dad scraped together the money by borrowing from one of his old friends and selling a few pieces of furniture, then proudly announced to the remaining wedding group members that everything was back on track. I heard about all this through my aunt, who found the whole thing tragic and hilarious at the same time. A few weeks later, the wedding planner disappeared. Completely. No messages, no calls, no social media activity, gone like smoke. The email address she used stopped working, and the phone number went straight to voicemail. Linda tried to save face by claiming the woman had a family emergency, but when days turned into weeks, it was clear they'd been scammed. The best part? They didn't even have a signed contract, just a few text messages and a Venmo transfer. Linda's friend, the one who had introduced them, swore she had no idea the woman wasn't legitimate. My dad apparently went into panic mode, calling everyone they knew, trying to figure out if there was any way to track her down, but it was too late. The money was gone. Haji beeped. When I heard about it, I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt tired of the drama, the manipulation, the endless cycle of self-inflicted disasters. Then my phone rang, and I saw my dad's name on the screen. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. When I answered, his voice was full of disbelief and wounded pride. He said, "Can you believe the betrayal?" I wanted to say, "Welcome to my world," but I bit my tongue and said, "I hope you kept receipts." They went ahead with the wedding anyway, a DIY backyard ceremony, as Linda dramatically called it on her Facebook event page, though judging by the photos and videos that trickled online, It looked more like a last-minute barbecue than a wedding. I didn't attend. I had already decided that my presence would only make things worse, and honestly, I couldn't stomach watching two people who had stolen from me and manipulated me parade around pretending everything was perfect. My half-sister, Maggie, who is 17 and Linda's daughter from her previous marriage, sent me a video anyway. She has always been more grounded than her mother, sharp, observant, with a quiet kind of maturity. She told me she thought I should see what I didn't miss. The video started with Linda walking down a makeshift aisle lined with plastic chairs from their garage. Someone had attempted to drape white sheets over them, but half were slipping off. The so-called buffet looked like a yard sale gone wrong. Guests had brought random dishes that didn't belong on the same table, spaghetti in plastic bowls, half-empty trays of deviled eggs, grocery store cupcakes, and, incredibly, one man holding a paper bag of McDonald's fries as if he was contributing fine dining. Linda wore a white sundress that looked suspiciously like something from Target. She had wrapped fake pearls around her neck and pinned plastic flowers into her hair, smiling as though she were walking through the ballroom of a five-star hotel. My dad stood under a cheap floral arch that looked like it had been borrowed from a dollar store, holding her hands. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, tired, weary, and trying to mask it with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The guests clapped politely, some already glancing toward the buffet before the vows were over. When the video ended, Maggie sent another message saying she was sorry. I told her it wasn't her fault. In a strange way, the video gave me closure. It showed me how far gone things had gotten and how right I had been to step back. A few days later, my dad called me and said he wanted to make peace. His voice was softer, almost hesitant, and something in me felt like it was time to listen. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. When he walked in, he looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the last few months had finally settled on his shoulders. He apologized, though it was the kind of apology that came wrapped in excuses. He said he realized he'd let love blind him, that he thought he was doing the right thing by trusting Linda. I nodded and let him speak because there was no point interrupting. But then, as if he couldn't help himself, he asked if I could help them recover some of their wedding expenses since they had invested everything and were now behind on rent. It was one of those moments where you almost choke on your drink because your brain can't process the audacity. I stared at him, trying to find the words, and what came out wasn't angry. It was tired truth. I told him no, but I also told him why. I explained that for years I had been the one holding things together, that I had learned survival from him, but not self-preservation, that he had taught me to work hard, to stay strong, to be independent, but he had also taught me unintentionally to sacrifice myself for people who confused love with obligation. I said I couldn't keep doing that, not anymore. He looked hurt, but he didn't argue. He just sat quietly, sipping his coffee, staring down at the table, like he was finally seeing the pieces of his life from a distance. After a long pause, he asked if I still planned to open my shop. I told him yes, next spring, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of genuine pride in his eyes. He said he hoped it would be everything I dreamed of, then stood up and left. That was the last thing he said to me for a long time. Then the following months were a blur of planning, late nights, and nervous excitement. I poured myself into getting the coffee and bookshop ready. I found a small space near the center of town, cozy but full of potential, with old wooden floors and tall windows that caught the morning light. I painted the walls warm colors, built shelves for secondhand books, and worked with local artists to decorate the space. I named it Full Circle Brew because in a way that's what it felt like, coming full circle from everything that had broken me to something that could finally belong to me. Last Sunday, it opened. My grand opening was surreal. People packed the small shop, laughing, taking pictures, ordering drinks. Friends, coworkers, even old professors came by. I had framed one of my mom's handwritten recipes and hung it on the wall behind the counter. She had loved coffee, the kind brewed slow and strong, the kind that filled the room with comfort. I also created a few signature drinks, one of which I called the Mark. It was espresso with extra sugar, my dad's favorite. I didn't do it out of irony or bitterness. It was my way of acknowledging that he was part of my story, no matter how complicated that part was. Um, Around noon, as I was cleaning the counter, the door opened and there he was, my dad, alone. He looked older still, but calmer, quieter. He had on a clean shirt and held a small bouquet of flowers he must have picked up from a grocery store. He looked around the shop slowly, taking everything in, the shelves, the books, the people. Then he looked at the drink board and noticed his name. His voice cracked slightly when he said he didn't think I'd name something after him. I smiled and told him that he taught me the value of a strong cup of coffee and an even stronger boundary. He laughed softly, almost sadly, but there was something in that laugh that felt like peace. He stayed for a while, sitting by the window, drinking his coffee quietly. He didn't ask for money, didn't make excuses, didn't mention Linda. He just seemed to want to exist there in that space I had built from the ashes of everything that once hurt. A few days later, Maggie stopped by. She had news. Linda had left my dad. Apparently, she'd maxed out his credit cards and moved in with none other than the so-called wedding planner's cousin, the same one who had scammed them out of $2,000. It felt like the final punchline to a story that had long lost its humor. My dad had lost almost everything, his savings, his apartment, and whatever remained of his dignity. When I heard that, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something closer to compassion, the kind that hurts because it comes with understanding. My dad had been foolish, but he wasn't cruel. He had loved someone who saw him as a stepping stone, and for that, he paid the price. A week later, I offered him a part-time job at Full Circle Brew. Nothing big, just helping with deliveries, small repairs, and errands. He accepted. He comes in a few mornings a week now, wearing an apron I had printed with the shop's logo. He doesn't talk much about the past, and neither do I. Sometimes I catch him watching the customers with quiet pride, smiling when they compliment the space or say how welcoming it feels. He never asks for money anymore. He just works quietly, wiping tables, fixing shelves, and refilling the sugar jars. There are moments when I watch him and wonder if I did the right thing, forcing him to fall so that he could learn to stand on his own. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't cruelty. It was the only way to break the cycle that had trapped both of us for so long. Was it cruel? It didn't feel that way. It felt real. And as I stood behind the counter, looking at my father cleaning tables in the cafe I built from everything they once tried to take, I realized that in the strangest way, we had both finally learned what family was supposed to mean. So, Reddit, that's where I am now. The shop is thriving. My dad is rebuilding, and the storm that nearly drowned us has finally passed. Still, I wonder sometimes, was I the villain for telling him their free wedding was unrealistic and for refusing to save them from their own mess? Or was it just time for me to stop being the parent in this family?